There's a new group, by the way, that sociologists have identified called the Duns. The Duns are the kids who grow up in church and are done. They tend to be among our most active kids. And by the time they get to be young adults, they're like, I just don't know that I need church to be a nice person. I'm done with this. It was good while I did it. It made me a better person. I'm more well-rounded. It's like playing the French horn in high school orchestra. It's something I'm glad I did. But who's a French horn player? I don't know. My daughter is a French horn player. Yeah. I'm glad I did it, but I just don't pick it up very much anymore. It's an extracurricular activity that I'm done with. This is also important because it affects how we go forward, right? Most of these nuns are not agnostics or even atheists. That number is pretty flat. They're just nothing in particular. If you ask, they don't hate religion, they don't hate religious people. Most of them come from our homes, right? And if you ask a lot of them, they'll say, I'd love to buy into this. I just don't really, I'm just trying to, be honest about where I am. So there are a few things that they're still doing which suggest that this religious impulse is very much alive in this group, right? They still meet in sacred places. Have you looked at who's in? I took my bishop around Princeton. He was like, how come nobody's in church? I'm like, let's take a walk. And we walked around Princeton and looked in every coffee shop, which was filled with young adults. And I'm like, they're just not, they're here, they're just not there. They still do prophetic things. This is a very big theme in the young adult cohort is, social activism. They still actually participate in religious-ish pilgrimages. Anybody know what this is from? Burning Man, yeah. The arts festival in the desert. Where you go into the desert and live in a cupcake for a week. I don't really know what that is. These are all exhibits that they had at Burning Man. Anyway. Okay. So here's the thing. Because of this exodus, because of the lack of traction that young people feel with faith, whatever it was when they were in high school, congregations, I'm going to switch to the congregational conversation for a second. Congregations have gotten in some habits about what they must do in order to attract young people. Now, one of the most significant things you can do if you want to take young people seriously is to have young leadership. This congregation has done that well, and I think it's probably paying off. But we've perpetuated some myths about what it means to bring young people into our midst that I want to get off the table, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the practices that might have some traction, okay? 2 myths that we just want to dispense with. 1, young people will save the church. Now, we hear this all the time, right? We hear it from congregations, we hear it from pastors, I hear it from bishops. Sometimes you guys don't have to deal with bishops, but I do. And it goes something like this. If our church is going to survive, we need more youth, young people, right. Our church is dying, we need young people to save us. Get the theology straight first. Young people will not save the church. Only Jesus Christ saves the church. Just name that, right? But what happens is, when we see young people as the salvation of the church, even if we see them as the future of the church, we start using young people for our own institutional ends, right? Nobody wants to be used. And young people know when they're being used, right? So what happens is you see some young people coming in the back of the church, and we don't think, wow, I wonder how God's calling them to, serve Christ in this community, for example. What we see, I call this vampire theology. What we see is, there's young blood, we need this one. And we proceed then to suck the life right out of them. Okay, this is an anxiety reaction. And the reason for that is because most churches think they're dying. And that's what anxiety is. You think your survival is at stake. So what happens when you think when you're feeling threatened in some way. We don't think with our whole brains, right? We think with the reptile part of our brains, we start thinking like lizards. And so this is what we do. You know this, we fight, What else do we do? Flight. You know the other two?
Freeze.
Freeze. And the other one is protect. This is from Murray Bowen. And not warm fuzzy protect. It's Mama Grizzly protect. Circle the wagons, protect our own, right? Because we feel threatened. Now we're not going to do this, but this would be an exercise that you could spend a lot of time on. Does your congregation have an anxiety disorder? Are any of these in overdrive in my congregation, right? And if that's so, what's at the root of that? What's at the root of all anxiety is some deep-seated sense that we feel threatened, right? When we don't feel threatened, these are off the table. Okay, so the second myth, let me just get to that, we'll move on, is that to appeal to young people means we have to act like one. All right, not even young people act like young people according to what we have stereotyped them as, right? But you've probably been to churches, or you know about churches, that are trying to become younger by acting the way they think young people act. And so, which I think is a little like the middle-aged guy who wears skinny jeans and grows stubble and drinks coconut milk and thinks he'll look 16. So first thing that most churches do, I know this congregation has not done this, but most churches do, if they decide that if time has come to attract young people, what do? That's exactly right. They start a praise band or a praise service of some kind. Now this is the part where I get in all sorts of trouble, and there are studies that will back this up that we will not go into, but what we know from the research is who likes praise music? It's not young people, it's who? It's boomers, exactly. People my age. There are two exceptions. There's nothing wrong with the praise band, unless you think that's how you're going to get young people to come. Most young people say it's cheesy, right? They can get far better music on iTunes. And so what happens is, we wind up creating the things we like, thinking it's going to attract young people. There are two exceptions to this. One is if you've had a really profound religious experience, like at a camp or something, where a certain kind of music was played, that becomes kind of the soundtrack of your life. So that becomes important to you. The second exception are the people who play in the band. They love this stuff. They go to seminary with astonishing regularity. I'm just letting you know. Okay. Right now, it's very popular to blame shallow Christianity on youth ministry. It's called the juvenilization thesis, and basically what it suggests is that shallow Christianity starts with youth ministry and then spreads like pink eye through the rest of the church. Okay? But we just heard all of this stuff that shows where are young people learning their shallow Christianity? From us, right, totally. So it's really an insult to teenagers to blame whatever we think is immature on them, right? They're learning a lot of that from us. Marketers learned a long time ago, you don't win young people by treating them like young people. You win them by treating them like people. Anyway, every person who works with teenagers knows this. The fastest growing denominations with young people, you know what these are? Pentecostals, the Eastern Orthodox. It's not because of the contemporary worship. Okay? The Amish. There's only 250,000 Amish in the US. They're not taking over anytime soon. But what do these have in common? They're high expectation cultures. They have high expectations for participation. If you're a Pentecostal, man, you just don't sit there in the pew, right? They have high expectations for embodiment, for using your whole life. I mean, if you're Amish, it's a way of life. It's not just a way of being on Sunday morning. They have high expectations for participation, right? So you are actually involved in what's going on. They have high expectations for community. All of these are very tight-knit communities. They are high expectation cultures. So they're living in a way that is contrary to the expectations of the broader culture in some ways. And there are problems. Don't romanticize these, right? There are reasons that are diabolical too that people stay with these. But if you're Amish, do you know how likely you are to stay Amish your whole life? After you do your rumspringa, you do your runaround period, you go try all the stuff that all the other kids in the high school are doing. How many of those kids come back and stay Amish for the rest of their lives? 90% or higher. Compare that to confirmation and see what happens. Right? Now, what's true, of course, is that if you don't come back, you're shunned. That has something to do with it, but okay. So there was a study that was done about 4 years ago now on churches that do a good job of addressing faith drift. What do these congregations have in common that allows young people to stay put, to stay in the communities they've grown up in, to make it part of their ongoing adult lives? One is that they are high expectation cultures. They're high expectation cultures in 3 ways. Okay, this is from Drew Dyson's dissertation research, and he studied congregations that do this. Okay, the first is they have high expectations for meaning. In other words, what happens in congregational life, what happens in your church, makes a difference that you can see. In other words, it's not just that there's some vague hope that this will eventually change you. You are doing things as a congregation that actually make a difference in your community, that actually make a difference in the lives of the people who are there. We can see that something has changed because the Christians showed up. You know, this is a whole other talk, but this is like my fantasy, is that we live in a world where when there is a huge complex problem to be solved, and people in a community get together and say, we got to get the most creative people in our community together to help solve this problem. What we need are some Christians. That's the world that we got to figure out how to get to, right? Anyway, high expectations for meaning. This is one reason why service is massively important in this age group, because it means something. It makes a difference. And so if I am going to be involved in, you know, you guys just had a bunch of people sleep here because it's so cold, you know, last night, that makes a difference. Those people would be cold and freezing if it were not for this church. Meaning, high expectations for meaning. And if you are involved, by the way, in a video game, you are investing in a story that has epic meaning. Not just a little bit of meaning, epic meaning, right? Saving the world is at stake. Churches tend to downplay that a lot. Okay, the second thing, you're going to have high expectations for belonging. Now, video games like World of Warcraft are kind of famous for being collaborative, right? You've got 12 million people who are all sort of aiming towards the same goal. In the World of Warcraft, everyone playing has a load-bearing role to play in helping, you know, accomplish the end of the game. Churches are just pretty happy if somebody shows up, right? This, again, I'm going to poke fun at United Methodist, and you can decide if it applies to you. So this is what caused John Stewart, of all people, to say this about the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church is the University of Phoenix. Now, John Stewart's Jewish. How does he know? But what he's saying is, there's just nothing upside down about these people. They don't expect very much. It's like, keep the bar low so that people can just sort of, whatever it takes, don't actually challenge them to be like Jesus, just let them go through. The quote's actually more extended. It's like, pay your $50 and you're saved, and you're in, you know. Don't tell people at Wesley Seminary, that would not end well. Anyway, churches tend to just be happy if people show up. So we've got to figure out ways that we are involving young people to the level of belonging and not just attending. Belonging means that when I show up, somebody notices, and when I'm not there, something is lost because I'm absent, right? That's what it means to belong. Everybody has a load-bearing role to play. Third, they have high expectations for hospitality. Drew even called this radical hospitality. Video culture is famous for accepting marginalized young people, right? People who don't feel like they fit in anywhere else feel like they fit in when they're part of a video game. They have better relationships, they have more relationships, and they have more appreciation for the skills that they contribute when they are online than in real life. No wonder they feel better about themselves playing a video game than they do in real life. So when young people can't find a way to do meaning, belonging, and radical hospitality through the church, right? They're going to find it someplace else. They're going to go someplace else to look at that. This is a story about what that one-way radical hospitality, let's use that one, gets played out. It was not through a church. Should have been. Wasn't. Neo-Nazi rally in Knoxville, 2007. This is how the day, there had been violence in the town that this group had been at before. It was the KKK and a few others. So you can see people lined up by the street. And then, but what happened was a group of young adults said, I think we can diffuse this in another way, right? So it wasn't very elegant. What they did was they came dressed up like clowns. They called themselves the Ku Klux Klans. And so the deal was that whenever they said white power, they were going to translate it into something stupid, and just make fun of it. They were trying to use humor to diffuse a tough situation. So the first one was white power. They go, oh, white flour, and they threw Pillsbury flour off. And then another one was, oh, tight showers. And then another one, they had a bunch of them, was wife power. And what happened, of course, was that, this movement, this hospitality that they were trying to, offer without being malicious, they were able to attract the media attention away from the neo-Nazis. I mean, who got the press that day, right? It wasn't the neo-Nazis. They actually packed up and went home. The parade never actually finished. These guys got all the press, and this is chronicled in this, it's a children's book by David Lamont. So here's the thesis that I'm going to leave you with before we go on to some of the practical things. I don't think it takes more young people to be a younger church. It takes more hope. And that is a response to the anxiety that we were talking about just a second ago. And I'm getting this from Jürgen Moltmann, who's a theologian, who said this. He basically said that it's not, this is the quote, it's not that the future belongs to the young, the future makes us young. What he means by that is this. For Christians, we have a different definition of what it means to be young than most of the world. What it means to be young is not age. It's hope. It's this wide open sense of possibility, this confidence that death is not on the horizon. This belief that the future opens all sorts of possibilities for us, that it is unlimited, it has unlimited potential, and that death does not hem us in. And that is the hope, not only of young people, but of everyone who lashes their lives to Jesus Christ. Because in Christ, right, death is not our horizon. Hope is our horizon. We have a future of unlimited possibility because our story does not end in death. And he tells a story about the Pope John Paul II, who was visiting. He's very ill at this point. He's visiting his hometown in Krakow. And the kids love this guy. I don't know if you followed this. Like Francis, the kids flocked to this person. And actually, Pope John Paul II started as a youth pastor. And they cheered him on, saying how young he was. You are young, you are young. That was the chant. And he was like, no, I'm 80 and I hurt. And then, this is the scripture they quoted. Youth shall faint and be weary. Young men shall fall exhausted, but they who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So this is the backdrop against which some of these practical things that we want to talk about are going to be placed. Now, this is the awkward transition, because in my head, we would be here about a half an hour ago, and we would take a coffee break. But I have to switch slides, and then I'll go to 6 things that I think churches might be able to do, okay? So if you want to grab coffee or something, go for it, and